our energy sector, if you look at the grid mainly, we have an installed capacity of over 2,800 megawatts. And of that capacity, we have around 336 megawatts of wind. And then we have around 52 megawatts of solar. So wind is about 12.5%, solar is about 2%. But also another thing to note is that we have a lot of solar that is not on the grid, either as home-based systems that are being used by various households. But we also have a development that has been in the pipeline on captive power. And as at 2019, it was noted that we have up to upwards of 40 megawatts of solar. So someone looking at solar and wind may think that it's a small portion of our energy, but because of the development and the dynamic nature of what is happening in that sector, makes that the future of our energy sources. And that is why, as a professional group, it is important that we keep updating ourselves with what is happening. So in the panel, we have people who actually have their boots on the ground, participating in the deployment of renewable energy, and we are going to learn from them. So mine is to open this session and welcome each and every one of you. At this point, I would like to hand over the session to our moderator, who will host us the whole afternoon. And it's none other than James Wakaba. James Wakaba has been in the energy sector for several decades now. Yes, there he is. In the energy sector for a couple of decades now. I think we're going into his third decade implementing projects in energy efficiency, electricity generation, and renewable energy and energy access. He is currently the director of Class Africa in the Africa office, and we are happy to have you, James. So I will hand over the meeting to you, and let us all engage and have a fruitful professional discussion this afternoon. Welcome, James.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hannes, and thank you to all the attendees of this forum. And thank you also to all the panelists who are here with us. I was initially worried when the meeting was starting to see there was only one lady present, Kajuju, but I've seen that the numbers have increased, and that will be good. Our sector is not particularly famous for being gender friendly, but I think that is changing. So welcome to this session. We are going to be together for the next almost 2 hours, trying to dissect this topic of the role of variable renewable energy in the energy mix of the country. A very important, if understated topic, but we have the right panel to do justice to this topic. So in terms of our schedule, we will we'll talk about, we've had the introductory remarks by the chair or the vice chair representing the chair of AEPEA. I will just make a few remarks at the beginning on the sector for about 5 minutes, and then we will introduce the panelists and ask them to make opening remarks on their areas of expertise and any particular points that they want to emphasize throughout this today's discussion. And then we'll have discussions where we will pose some questions to the panelists, and they will respond on the basis of those questions. And of course, they are free to veer outside, not too far outside the questions. We will take the first 30 minutes to focus on the grid, and then we'll take the next 30 minutes to focus off grid. And then we hope to have around 30 minutes of discussion at the end of this. So feel welcome. I know it's a Friday afternoon. During the times when we used to have physical meetings, people struggled to overcome the effect of gravity after having some ugali. I hope that the online forum offers everyone an opportunity to stay even more awake, to participate very, very strongly. I would then to start posing any questions that you may have on the. We will continuously monitor the questions in the chat. Please try and address the questions to specific individuals. We have a large panel, so it may be difficult to point out. However, that should not restrain you from from asking your question, even if you cannot identify the particular panelist that you want to direct your questions to. Now, as Hannes has said, I've been in this sector for a very long time, and one of my experiences in this forum is that for us to make it constructive, we need a couple of rules that I've found very useful. And I have facilitated a lot of such sessions, including training in energy efficiency and renewable energy and all. And one of the most important things is to focus on the solutions. I think if you go to the media, you will be able to see the number of complaints that we have in the sector, and everybody has something to say. And unfortunately, not a lot of it is solution-oriented. Not a lot of it is positive. So let's try and focus on the solution, not to ignore the problems, not to pretend that the problems do not exist, but to really say, what can we do? Because we are the experts, we are the people who will provide the solutions to this country. And if we don't, then probably nobody else will. And so there is no us versus them. And that has been a very key feature of these kinds of forums. I remember earlier around 2003 going to a forum in Eldoret to talk about energy efficiency to industry, to members of industry. And the people who attended, who are fairly senior people in industry, they said, no, we must talk about Kenya. You cannot come and tell us to be efficient ourselves. We know what to do inside our factories, so don't come and tell us that. Let's talk about Kenya Power and what they can do. And we said, sorry, we cannot do that. We are not representing Kenya Power or anybody or the government. We are here to talk about what we think we can do on our own. Not to say that others, the utilities in government, don't have a role to play. They have a major role to play, but sometimes it pays to focus on what we can do. And half of the attendees walked out, and but we were left with a very good half, and those have been very good. I still see them occasionally in the news as being some of the ones who have saved a lot of energy by focusing on efficiency internally. So let's have that mindset as well. And then finally, engineering type forums are famous for being extremely boring. We are not more interesting, so please raise up your hand if you want to interject, and let's make it an interactive forum. With that, I'll just make very few remarks at the beginning, because I'm not really the person talking. Today is the day for the panel, and just to say two things. One is on the question of the grid versus off-grid. A lot of the discussions that we tend to engage in focus a lot on the grid, and there's nothing wrong with focusing on the grid, especially in this era where we have up to 70% of Kenyans connected to electricity, according to the statistics that are available to us. And I know some of you have occasion to question those statistics, but it is important to focus on the grid. All I'm saying is that there has already been quite a lot of focus on the grid, and we will take half the time to talk about the situation on the grid. But it's also important to remember the 30% who are not connected to electricity or to grid electricity, 30% plus, and also the many who, even though they are connected to electricity, they either cannot afford it, or certainly they cannot afford to use it for cooking. It's not enough, or it's too expensive. So there is a lot of off-grid work that needs to be done for this country to achieve SDG 7, which is about universal access to energy, which is clean, which is affordable, and which is reliable. So we will take time to also focus off-grid. And all the panelists, and I know many of them were caught a bit off guard by this suggestion, but all of us will be forced to wear an off-grid hat in the second half of the session. In the first half, we will focus on the grid, and Hannes has started to talk about the kind of grid that we have, the energy mix in the grid, and I'm sure all of us have seen those numbers. We have a lot of hydropower, probably around 600 megawatts. We have 700 megawatts of geothermal or thereabouts. We now have a fair amount of wind. We have, at least on the nameplate capacity, 300 megawatts in Turkana, and in the recently launched Kipeto at 100. And of course, Kengen also has wind in Gong and other places under development. Garissa Solar recently commissioned, and one of the panelists will talk to us about Garissa Solar. As Hannes again said, we have upwards of 50 megawatts of embedded solar, which is sitting in various places. A lot of it is C&I, commercial and industrial solar, which has become a thing in the recent past. And many commercial and industrial enterprises have installed solar power for themselves. And there are questions around how we can make that more. There are questions around whether the excess of that can be either exported to the grid or distributed within the locality of the person who has developed that, and what are all the economics and the politics and the policies around that, and whether the same situation can be replicated areas where we have resorts and hotels and other amenities which are out there who can probably be able to install solar, and yet they have communities around them who are in need of power. So that is the situation in the grid. There is our problems around energy access. There is a hierarchy of needs around energy access that we need to talk about. One is the universality of that access. How universal is our access to energy? SDG 7 looks at universal access 100%, so everybody has a reasonable amount of access using the multi-tier framework. How much energy do you have for lighting, and how much energy do you have for cooking and other amenities? And we used to say in the days of power rationing that the cost of no power is always higher than the cost of any power, and this still holds. Sometimes we focus a lot on cost and forget that there are people who don't have access, and those who don't have access would probably prefer to have it there and pay more if they are not, for them to access it rather than to stay without. So in the hierarchy of power needs, access is right there on top. It can be even argued, and I in particular support this argument sometimes, that even in environmental sustainability is about to access, especially in the African context. Some people say we must only develop using green power, but I would rather have diesel power available to me rather than have no power. And let's not forget that even if we shut down the entire country or even the entire continent, the impact of warming would still be very minimal compared to even single countries like China or the United States or even some European countries like Germany. So access is important. Not to say that cost is another important aspect. Affordability and cost can be tiered, but affordability among our people, I think it's important to consider that even as we address the question of access. Plus reliability, we've had a lot of issues on reliability, especially on electricity. And then environmental sustainability. We do still take it seriously, notwithstanding my earlier statement about which ones falls higher in the hierarchy of our needs. And then quality. Again, we don't want our components spoiled by value. We don't want our food half cooked because we don't have sufficient energy to cook our food. With all these measures on the panel, and to introduce the panel, I will just go by the order in which the panelists appear on the brochure that was circulated. And so it's not in any order of preference or gender or anything, just to introduce them. Unfortunately, I don't have the bios for I think 2 or 3 of you, so I'll ask you to introduce yourselves. But I'll start with Mr. Murefu Baraza. He is the managing partner at EED Advisory, which is a consultancy that focuses a lot on in the energy space, looking at energy access for the last 17 years and engaging several clients, top-notch clients, Ministry of Energy, World Bank, UN agencies, private entities, and research institutions. So he looks after one of the preeminent advisory companies in the country. The second panelist is Mr. Kevin Mwangi. He is a technical advisor at GIZ. He is looking at the Kenya Power System readiness for integration of variable renewable energy. So he is one of the ones who are dealing directly with the topic of today on a day-to-day basis, although focused a lot on the grid, but I'm sure he can also talk about off-grid. The third panelist, Mr. Mark Hankins, also known as Mr. Marcus Kamau, requires no introduction. He has been in the industry for a long time. He's a preeminent solar expert in this country, and he runs several companies. The most well-known right now is called African Solar Designs, and he is the pioneer on CNI in the country. But he has 25 years experience in the country and worked for many clients, including the UN, World Bank, UNIDO, GEF, SIDA, and many others. And I personally have known Mark, or known about Mark, since around year 2001. We also have Mr. Thaddeus Kroba. He is the Chief Projects Engineer at KenGen, and he has implemented the pioneer wind farm in Kenya, so he knows Ngong territory like the back of his hand. And he was involved in concept development and installation of that wind farm. He's currently a resident engineer at Olkaria Unit 6, so he is now also a geothermal expert. We also have Mr. Ayub Njoroge, who is an electrical engineer, and his area of expertise is energy efficiency, renewable energy, and particularly focusing on finance. And he works for Ecoligo, which is a German solar as a service provider in the region. I would like to ask Kajuju to introduce herself. I know Mr. Rono and I know Kajuju, but I wouldn't be confident introducing her. So if you could unmute and introduce yourself, please. Kajuju, yeah, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you, James. I step in for Geoffrey Rono, who is actually the member of the association. I'm a director at Ofgen Limited, and we are a solar company that supports clients to meet their energy efficiency efforts by enabling them to captive solar power plants. We've been doing this since 2014, and we are privileged to have about 6 megawatts of solar power and about 8 megawatt hours of storage under management. It's my first time to be part of your discussions, and I'm extremely privileged to be here this afternoon. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Kijuju. We have Maxwell Ngala. Are you online?
Yes, I am.
Please introduce yourself and tell us. Just to you still have time to talk about your work, but this is just an introduction.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Maxwell Ngala, as you have indicated. Currently work with the Rural Electrification and Renewable Energy Corporation as plant engineer at the Garissa Solar Power Plant, and have been involved in the development and the O&M for that grid connected plant, and in the design and development of solar PV diesel hybrid mini grids in different parts of the country. And I'm also a fellow at the International Solar Alliance. Happy to join the discussion this afternoon.
Thank you, Maxwell. Please remember to unmute, to switch on your video if you can, if you are at least when you are talking, so that people can get to see you. Okay, very good. There we are. So without any further ado, I would like us to move into topics, discussions. And to save on time, I think I would suggest that when I mention your name, take 1.5 minutes to talk about your work a little bit of yourself, and then you address the question. So combine this introduction session with the on-grid discussion. So just introduce yourself very briefly, your company or your work, and then tell us something about the role of variable renewable energy grid. So I will start once again with Murefu Barasa, and the questions that deal with is what are some of your thoughts, experiences in variable renewable energy on the grid? What is appropriate? What is cheaper? How do we balance the interests of the consumer, the investors, the utilities, and the government, so that everybody that they are playing this role to towards making variable renewable energy on the grid appropriate level that works, that is viable for the country, that is for consumers, and that is also good for the environment. So Murefu, and please show us. Oh yeah, you are already on. Thanks.
James, thank you for the introduction, and also thank you for organizing this very important convening. It's such a privilege. Mentioned, I'm the managing partner at EED Advisory, which is a Pan-African consulting company. I'll not dwell too much on explaining EED and what we do, because James has already done that. But I'll just add by saying that we have 3, which is energy, water, and climate change. So in addition to energy, we also look at various aspects of water and climate change. We cover projects in other countries as well. So we cover and I think it's even, and we get targeted questions from the audience, as opposed to us just saying what we think the audience would like to hear. But I'd like to start by making the advent of renewable energy and the prospects of renewable energy playing a role in achieving universal access have never been greater in the history of humanity, I think, in my opinion. One, because the cost of renewable energy have been drastically declining over the years. And this doesn't just include solar panels, wind turbines, but it also goes together with the associated accessories, things like battery storage solutions, accessories such as LED lights, which kind of have a compound effect on the role of renewable energy. So the prospects that we are looking at insofar as renewable energy playing a critical role, especially in Africa, because our priority in Africa is attaining universal access by 2030. And this is the number one priority, in my view, again, when we look at the hierarchy of priority. So some of the things I would start by saying is there's a need to defend renewable energy, and I'm glad that this panel typically isolated variable renewable energy, because many times when there are discussions on renewable energy, it's discussed as if all renewable energy discussions around dispatchable renewable energy, such as geothermal and hydro, being done in the same way as discussion variable renewable energy like wind and solar. And of course, the two are similar, but they're substantially different in the way you integrate them and you include them in meeting your energy demand. So that's the first point. The second point I'd like to make is that it's important to this context. So you'll see discussions around things like Africa should go green, or Africa should leapfrog renewable energy, or Africa should sidestep coal and fossil fuels. I find that argument to be quite problematic, because you will not hear Poland, which heavily depends on coal, versus Norway, which is almost 90% hydro. It's night and day when you think about the energy mix. And the same is true for Africa, because if you look at East Africa, Kenya, you think of Ethiopia, you think of Tanzania with the Julius Nyerere hydro dam in construction. These countries have the ability to walk into a future that's green. But if you look at West Africa, if you look at Southern Africa, countries like South Africa in particular, which depends heavily on coal, Nigeria, which depends on gas, and Benin and Senegal, those contexts are very, very different, not just in terms of the renewable energy resource, but also the structure of the electricity sector. So some countries have fully integrated structures like Ethiopia, Tanzania with TANESCO, and others have unbundled structures like Kenya. Others are privatized like Umeme in Uganda, while others are fully public owned. So the issue of context is very, very important. And I'm glad that this forum looks at it from off-grid and on-grid. Then the third point, and my final point in the introduction, is the discussion around price. So I started by saying that the price of renewable energy has never been this attractive in the history of humanity. But one thing I'd like to point out is when discussing renewable energy, some have the question reversed. We ask, which is the cheapest technology available? So the answer to that would probably be it costs to meet a need, because need to size your system. When you look at the ability of renewable versus dispatchable, the capacity factors determine the level of investment. So with those few remarks, I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Supplier and I think that's a very good approach. So we can go to Kevin Mwangi, and as you introduce your work, you still viable grid, and you can look at that from the context of the work that you're doing, but also from your general experience. And while you get ready, everyone's being reminded to introduce themselves on the chat, just to register your details there, so that AEPEA can have a record of who attended this meeting. Thank you. So over to Kevin.
Thank you very much, James. Good afternoon, everyone, where you are in the world. My name is Kevin Mwangi, a technical advisor working with GSZ, as James mentioned, and on two projects, but one is the power system readiness for the where as in looking and all and stations and renewable variable energies. In these four areas, we for example, and how is the grid being operated with regards to VREs? And as we mentioned in the beginning, like we have almost 325 or 336 megawatts of wind. And a single plant in Kenya is a VRE project. Look at how these are operated, how is control center structured with regards to VREs. How are the developers or the project operators structured? How do we do forecasting, etc. But on policy and I will talk a little bit about planning, is that one, policy for VREs and mostly, and also and here because you're talking about solar, really needs to be guided from data. It should be data-based or evidence-based policy. As we continue, we find ourselves in situations where we have policy, just as Murefu said, that we talk about, yes, Africa, let's go green. And there is no evidence or data that is backing our policy on how we should go. And this then will be informed through proper planning using state-of-the-art tools for modeling that then informs this policy. And this policy then becomes investment policies that will attract investors to come into the space of VREs, that is solar PV and wind, because we find a situation where we need to find a situation where we use cost-benefit analysis, and Murefu has really hit the jackpot by saying, by even comparing the charcoal and the firewood, because we need this cost-benefit analysis in our planning that then informs policy, because then we'll ask ourselves in policy, do we need to add additional VREs into the system, solar PV plants into the system? Do we
One minute only.
Yes, thank you very much. And on regulations, we think that, yes, we need to relook our regulations with regards to the the Energy Act of 2019. Some
Mark Hankins. Mark, as I said, has skin in the game as the practitioner on CNI. And the question that he will be addressing as he introduces himself is solar sector to a better.
And thanks to the association for inviting me and creating this great platform. So my name is Mark Hankins. I've been working in Kenya for over 30 years, and I've had the privilege to be a solar worker for 30 years. I work for African Solar Designs with one hat, and African Solar Designs is a consulting firm which provides specialized expertise in the solar sector. And with ASD, I've worked in over 20 African countries. I also work with Git Invest, which is a European funded group that helps companies find investment funds. So we work as a go-between investors and entrepreneurs, and we help. And if anyone's interested, I left my address for Git Invest. I also am a NORCAP expert, and I provide expertise to the renewable energy sector and in the humanitarian sector. Working on a number of projects right now, but I'll jump into the question. I was asked about. I was asked about C&I solar. How can C&I solar contribute to a and can net metering help, and what can low-cost batteries help? I want to step back. If you look at me, I'm at the last third of my career, but we need to be visionaries. Most of you, I think, are young, and we need to be visionaries. In 1985, I was a teacher in a secondary school, and some crazy person told me that he could light up the school with solar electricity. 1985. And we were successful, we did it, and that started the journey. But when we did that, we were considered crazy. We were considered crazy, and some of us had a vision that solar was going to happen, and we had to fight our way to the future. We had to fight for our visions. So young people, please be visionary. Please be optimist. Please think about how you can affect change. Because, you know, in 2020, we have 2 million PV systems in Kenya. Small ones, medium ones, large ones, doing all kinds of things. When we talk about C&I solar, I would argue that we're closer to 100 megawatts than 40 megawatts, because we haven't had any good study, but I can name 40 megawatts just offhand. I visited a megawatt at 2 different sites last week, and if you consider all of the small solar panels on roofs in Nairobi, those are also embedded solar systems in urban environments. And if you look on people's roofs, not solar water, but PV, they're all over the place. So I would say we have closer to 100 megawatts of grid or grid proximate solar systems. So where are we headed into 2030? And that's a really important question. Most of you are going to take up that question. So how can C&I solar, commercial and industrial solar, help? Well, C&I solar is helping now. And C&I solar is done almost by definition in the private sector, a few universities, but that 100 megawatts of solar is purchased because of cost. People are putting in those solar systems because it's cheaper. So in the private sector, cost does drive things, but also security. People are motivated by security of supply. And thirdly, a little bit because of green. A lot of the flower farms want to see themselves going green. But so solar is helping. How is it going to help the grid more? Well, we're going to see solar move for reasons. First, middle class and small businesses are going to start buying solar more and more. So far we've seen only the biggest the biggest companies. As prices come down, more and more companies are going to get involved in solar. The second issue was on net metering. Net metering, in order to make net metering happen, net metering is when consumers are allowed to get from the power company for dumping excess power online. So if you put solar on your roof, the excess power that you sell to the grid when you're not using it, you'd get a credit on your bill. Can it work in Kenya? Well, there's an excess of power on the grid right now. There's an excess of power on the grid in Uganda. There's an excess of power on the grid in Ethiopia. But what is with this oversupply? Because that's the only way that Kenya Power is going to survive. So as visionaries, we need to think our way through this. And having too much power is a great problem to have, but what we need to do is ban that supply so that when there's excess power at 3 a.m. at night, which Kenya Power is paying for, so that power produced by Kana at 3 a.m. and no one is using, we have to make it cheaper for companies to use that. And that requires policy, and that requires banding of prices so that late night power becomes cheaper and companies set up plants. So we need to rethink and renegotiate PPAs, but also rethink how power is priced by different times. If we had an oversupply of solar power in the middle of the day, we could make some of that power cheaper. So that's my second point. And my last point I'm coming to is batteries are coming. You know, electric cars, people talk about Tesla, but the Chinese are very far ahead of Tesla in actual implementation of electric mobility. Electric mobility is coming, and electric mobility is actually, if you cost it out versus petroleum, it's cheaper, and it's per kilometer traveled. If you're using 20 cents per kilowatt hour electricity in Kenya, electric power is cheaper power for driving a car. So the electric vehicles all have sophisticated batteries. In Kenya, you can buy right now 3 types of very high-tech batteries, and their prices are going down as fast as the prices of solar did a few years ago. So batteries and storage will change things, because if we can use batteries and cluster all of those batteries together, then we have ways which those batteries can complement the hydro storage, and we can think of new ways to even out the intermittencies of wind and solar. So I believe, you know, there are ways to think about in the future to even out the grid. The technology is there. What's missing is the policy intelligence from the government and the entrepreneurship of us, of people, membership in this group, to develop the solutions to these problems and get them in place. And I'll shut up now.
Thank you very much, Mark. Very well summarized. C&I is a thing already, and it's working and it's helping, driven by cost, security of supply, and greenness. And net metering is a possibility if we think innovatively about how we look at time of use power, how we buy and sell power into the grid, and who pays for what time of use. And the batteries are becoming cheaper, led by the Chinese, and this can help in clustering. It can help in addressing those other 2 points about net metering and about the role of C&I. So thank you very much. We are getting a bit short of time on our on-grid. To invite the two engineers who are working actually on the grid, and that is Engineer Kuoba and Engineer Maxwell. So we start with Engineer Kuoba, and you tell us, Engineer, what are the challenges from an operational perspective? What are the challenges and what is an ideal proportion of variable renewable energy to maintain a stable grid? So Engineer Koba.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you also for the association for giving us this opportunity. As James said, I'm Engineer Koba, working as a chief engineer on projects in KenGen, and I've been involved in the Pioneer Wind Farm in Kenya, of course, being the wind farm that was developed by KenGen. We actually, as KenGen, we pioneered. We have the experience on pioneering on wind, and before we put up the 25 megawatts in Gom,
nice to have members in this forum visiting the plant and the area to appreciate some of the issues that go on in that part of the world.
Thank you.
I think I'll put it there. In terms, I don't know if I was supposed to couple this with one or two comments. Of course, if you'd allow me.
I would allow you to make a comment regarding whether this power that you've been dispatching, the 90 gigawatts and the 88 gigawatts, is constrained in any way by factors in the grid, or is that all you could produce?
Yes, thanks. That really, apart from one, I think in the time that we have run the plant, there was a significant day last year. I think there was a national outage that affected the grid significantly. That I think is the only day that we were curtailed in quotes. Otherwise, we've been able to feed to the grid as much as we generate on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, we can take a pause there. Thank you very much, Maxwell. You'll probably have an opportunity to. I suspect there'll be a few questions for you, so you'll have an opportunity to give us your lessons at that point. Because at this point in time, I would like to turn our attention to the people who deal with the money, people with some expertise in financing. And we will start with Kajuju of Ofgen and ask her, would you finance projects that connect commercial C&I to the grid, and under what conditions? So tell us about the ones you finance currently and how you finance them, and then how you would extend that financing to projects that connect to the grid, the ones that Mark Hankins has talked about. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have muted. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Apologies for that. Thank you, James, once again. Just to reintroduce myself and Ofgen, we are actually, as you had previously stated, a few of the farms that are boots on the ground, and we are privileged to be able to both have a taste of the engineering bits of it and also the funding side of the sector. I think my opening remark would be the renewable energy revolution is here to stay, and we cannot ignore it. I think what is of importance for all of us is how can we all work together to bring it to pass and to ensure that we are doing this skillfully, thoughtfully, and responsibly enough to ensure that we don't basically reap the entire energy sector in East Africa and Africa to pieces. I think that said, for us on the financing bit of this space, we would definitely be happy to finance connections, that C&I connections, that also includes a solution that needs to be grid tied. We'll definitely do that. I think the financing bit that we look at is purely based on one, what is the pricing that is going to be put across to these customers, and a lot of that is based on exactly what is their need. You'll find there are consumers who are in areas that have stable supply from the utilities, but they're still looking to have captive solar solutions put in their factories, their industries, their farms. You'll find companies that like this have evolved to a point that this is more about their sustainability targets rather than just an issue of maybe cost. You'll find others that, yes, they have stable grid but mix for their businesses that is cost efficient. So they'll be looking for the solutions from an angle of cost saving. Humans who don't have the privilege of having stable grid supply, and for them their energy on predominantly on diesel, on generators becomes extremely expensive. So some of these companies will be thinking of how to save. So every consumer is unique. You will price the solutions for them will be different. As I said, at the end of the day, it has to be done responsibly in a way that we are actually passing through the benefits to the end users, and it's not purely just rushing to take for profit, and it's not purely an issue of profiteering for businesses like ourselves, is that we are actually pushing forward the agenda, and we are doing it in a way that the price or the cost of the solution does not become a hindrance into actually achieving the end goal, which is having renewable energy, so that all of us, as businesses, as communities, can be able to that we've set out to achieve. In terms of what would be the conditions for us being able to finance such installations, a lot of this, as we are giving solutions over a long period of time. And this now becomes more a discussion of how good is your credit and how well are you paying your suppliers? Because at the end of the day, businesses such as ours will be one of your suppliers, and we'll now start looking at it purely from a commercial point of view of, are you able to pay your bill, and will you be, you know, a good paymaster at the end of the day to ensure the investment that was made to enable you have that solar captive power So those are the things I think we'll predominantly take into consideration. Of course, there are many other factors that will come into play. You'll find us looking at where have these installations been put? What is the environment that they're being placed? What is the rate of replacement of some of the inputs that will require replacement? So all these things we are going to take into consideration when we take a decision as to where we are going to invest or place money in terms of for questions.
Thank you very much. That's really good perspective, that you have to find the customer in the place that he or she is, and identify their needs, their drivers. Is it cost? Is it reliability? Is it environment? And then you tailor a solution. You finance a solution around those customers' needs. I would imagine that going forward, there will be a role for African solar designs who can go and negotiate with Kenya Power if there is if the demand picks up. As Mark said, we should be helping drive demand up by being innovative. And by having that demand go up, you can then go and negotiate with Kenya Power that I'm going to supply you 100 megawatts of solar. And that does not have to be located in one plant in Garissa or someplace. You can locate that power in 20 buildings in Nairobi, and you supply it, even as you supply the captive power to your primary client, who is the owner of the roof or the space where you're building the plant. Those are considerations for the future as you evolve to become utilities from smaller ESCOs. So thank you very much, Kajuju. And finally, on to Ayub, who is an expert as well in financing, especially for energy efficiency, but also for renewable energy. So Ayub.
Thank you so much for the chance to speak in this forum, and also thank you, AEPEA, for putting it together, and James also for modulating this, and all the speakers that have come before me. It is very humbling to see all of you here discussing a very very good thing, up to date. And I'm very, very glad to come in. I'll be very, very brief. My name is Ayub Njoroge, and I work for a company called Ecoligo. And Ecoligo, some of you have heard Ecoligo. We've been active in Eastern Africa for the last about 4 years now. And we are actually very, very happy to work with Ofgen in financing their projects also. I should also mention that. Our core business in the region is to finance solar power projects, and also energy efficiency as a service. That includes LED, efficient air conditioners, UPSs, variable speed drives, but mainly financing solar power in the region. Yeah, but yes, I've been able to work in energy efficiency for the last about 6 years in a number of countries within Eastern Africa. There is a lot to say about energy efficiency, but the very question that was asked by from me by the panelist was if our grid is efficient. This is such a good question, and there are many dimensions to it. We'll just look at one dimension. Efficiency in terms of input versus output. What is generated versus what is consumed. What is generated, what is transmitted versus what is consumed. I think one biggest headache for Kenya Power and KenGen and also KETRACO is data. We know very well that none of these companies are storing the energy that they generate. The national grid does not store energy. And for that reason, it becomes a bit tricky for them to be able to exactly predict and supply, not just predict and supply the demand that is needed by the consumer. And I would say that this is the main reason that actually contributes to many power cuts. Many outages. And this is a measure of how inefficient we think the grid is. The best way to measure this efficiency also is in the how much the manufacturers are losing with every power cut. I still look forward to a time when like countries like Australia are having a total of 20 minutes power cuts in the whole year. But I think the best starting point should be to be able to get data, a predictable data for consumption, consumption of the utility by the end consumer, the end user, because this is really a headache. You know, one thing I understand for KenGen, they have the discretion to switch some substations and put and shut up or bring up or put on other substations depending on the demand and at what time of the day. But I again want to say that the inefficiency that is perceived or that is there by these companies, both the generator, the transmitter, and also the distributor, is getting the correct data of consumption. I would want to say, of course, there are other internal issues with the companies that are causing inefficiency. But for me, and my opinion would be, we need to collect data of the demand at the market side. We are having a lot of surplus, but we are still we are still having lots of power cuts, lots of inefficiency in our grid, and for me, the underlying cause is data. And the second question that had actually been raised: what can be done at the consumer end? I would still come back to the same of data. We need very good data by these three companies, that is KETRACO, KPLC, as well as KenGen, to be able to clearly predict what the demand at the market is, and thereby increase efficiency in being able to serve this demand. I would want to stop at that, Mr. James, and invite any questions when we come to that time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ayub, especially for pitching very strongly for data to improve overall efficiency in the system. It's good to have predictability. What is the demand, and to calibrate the supply accordingly so that you don't have outages and at the same time you don't have oversupply, which leads to wastage when you run plants when you start plants and then you run them at under capacity. I see one question from Sarah Quach. I would give her an opportunity before we move on to the next session, which will be on off-grid. Did I see a hand up from Sarah Quach? Maybe it was inadvertent, in which case I would be happy to move to the next stage, which is the off-grid, because as I said earlier, and I've fallen victim of my own prediction that we sometimes don't give it sufficient attention. So I will ask Murefu to open the discussion on off-grid by answering that very question. Do we give off-grid energy access sufficient attention as a country? And in your view and in your experience, how can we increase energy access in off-grid contexts? I know it's broad, but I just your own perspectives and experiences.
Yeah, thank you, James. Let me use my first 30 seconds just to mention something about on-grid. So in many forums where I have either participated or been just listening in, there's a lot of pessimism when it comes to the electricity sector and KPLC and all these things. But I think it's also good to sometimes step back and appreciate the gains so far. So when I got my first real job, and actually it's Mark Hankins here who gave me my first real job in 2003, the electrification rate in the country was less than 20%. And Kenya Power and of course the other entities in the electricity sector managed to increase connections from 3.5 million in 2015 to over 7 million by 2019. And during when the World Bank was putting together the SDG 7 tracking report in 2019, Kenya had the highest annual increment in electrification rate. So I think there are also very many gains here. And like Mark put it, I think it's a good problem when we are talking about overcapacity and the opportunities as other panelists have raised. So I just wanted to start by saying that. Then moving on to the question of off-grid. So is it something that's discussed on the side? I would say that a few years back, off-grid used to be the forgotten child, but I think now off-grid has kind of graduated to the little brother or the little sister in this discussion. So I think there's a lot of progress. I remember during PS Nyoike's time at the Ministry of Energy, I think off-grid was a peripheral issue, but I think there have been very many gains so far with programs, of course, like COSAP, which is government-led. So let me just say, for the sake of this discussion, so off-grid would be decentralized solutions. One example is mini-grids and microgrids. The other example is standalone solutions like solar home systems, institutional solutions, captive solutions, etc. And then there are also other forms, for example, energy kiosks, you have battery swapping services. So all this, I consider them as off-grid for the purpose of this discussion. So what can be done? And I just want to focus on 4 points in the interest of time. So one, recognizing off-grid as a sustainable, appropriate solution for electrification. So not as a side thing, but actually part of the family. And I think this is increasingly being done, and it has been done quite progressively. If you look at the Kenya National Electrification Strategy, it has a big portion looking at off-grid solutions. So that's the first one, recognizing off-grid in our discussions, in our planning, in our strategies, in our curriculums, recognizing off-grid as part of the solution. Then the second is really financing options. So with utility scale electrification, there are lots of, there's a lot of, let me say, subsidies and other forms of support, because just by its nature, energy access is not necessarily the most profitable business in the world. And all over the world, utilities are subsidized, even in Europe. In fact, there was a study we were looking at. In Europe, every user is estimated to be subsidized at $300 equivalent. And this is Europe. These are advanced markets, you know. So when, for example, a connection is subsidized by the government or through the last mile connectivity project, that's not unusual. But the off-grid seems to be thriving just by itself and through private sector initiatives. And also you have other schemes like the NDEV, results-based financing. But by and large, financing, when you compare off-grid and on-grid, it's night and day. So we need to think about how do we redirect financing, and especially public sector financing, into off-grid solutions. The third is to allow for innovation. Let's create some space for innovation. there's always a tendency or temptation to come up with standards and policy and very many restrictive measures in the early days of an innovation. There needs to be an allowance for experimentation and for some projects to fail and for some to succeed and for the sector to learn as it goes, like what's happening in the mini-grid sector. Then the fourth and final point, and this everyone bangs on this, and this is the issue of policy. But of course, policy underlines all these initiatives. And in Kenya, for example, we are now looking at revising the mini-grid guidelines, which is a good example about government and taking deliberate effort to promote off-grid sector. So I would say those four things: recognizing off-grid, financing off-grid, allowing innovation, and policy. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Murefu, and thank you also for summarizing, because then I don't have to do that. Asante sana. Mark, 2 minutes, just talk about the CNI. I mean, apart from just being captive for the client, how else can we use it to extend to off-grid?
2 minutes. Okay, let me not call it CNI.
Yeah.
Let's call it professional systems in the off-grid space. We've been very successful in changing the donors and the government to help us address off-grid electrification, and that's been great. So, but here's the issue I see. We have supported companies to go for base of the pyramid, and most of the people probably listening here would not like to electrify their house with a Greenlight Planet solar device. You'd probably want to put in a 1 kilowatt solar system in your off-grid rural household, or half a kilowatt or something like that. And the area that we're missing is policy directives and private sector support to help people put in place decent mid-sized systems. And when people go to Davidson Shirtlift, or when they go to a supplier, they look at the price and they go, whoa, and they walk away. We need to be as successful as AEPEA was in supplying 20-watt solar systems with finance at financing middle class and business systems in off-grid areas. So we have tremendous off-grid areas, but we're trying to support that sector with pico systems, with very small systems, and we don't have finance systems in place for say a 1 or 10 kilowatt solar systems. So a lot of the work being done is being done very poor because the companies are stretched and the people and the consumers are stretched. So my final point, you asked about regulations. We don't want to be over-regulated. Kenya is the only country in East Africa which regulates solar technicians. I appreciate that. That is great. But I also don't want the Kenya government telling me as a household that has an off-grid solar system how to do my solar system. So we have to balance policy. We can't over-regulate. You can't have the government telling you what you can do and what you can't do. I always give the example that someone can install a genset in their house, but they need government approval to put a solar system in their house. They need a T3 technician, and they need a commissioning document for that solar system. And so let's not over-regulate. Let's allow the private sector to blossom, and let's get more financing into the middle class and business sectors, because we've done very well in the base of the pyramid sector. And that also plays to your work in CLASP, because productive use is really what builds economies. And so if we can get middle class to invest in bigger systems, pumping, milling, refrigeration, the internet, this will build incomes in rural areas. So my point is, let's look at bigger systems in rural areas and let's get financing in that sector.
Thank you very much, Mark. Replicating the copper system up the kilowatt scale, and also very targeted regulation that is not that does not hamper the development. Very quickly, Kevin, any way you can translate the policy regimes that you are considering into the off-grid space?
Not really, but I think our views on the policy from our experience as having worked in the mini-grid space, that is GIZ, also being there for a while, since 2013, is that then on policy, we think that then we need to do some policy equalization, or on policy, we need some equalization on the tariffs, because with this public mini-grids having cross subsidies and then the private sector having to charge cost-reflective tariffs, it's not a balanced playing field in my view and in our view. And we also think that, for example, we have seen examples where now there's competition also for sites between private sector and public sector and the public agencies, and where the low-hanging fruits, for lack of a better word, also are picked up by the public sector. And our thinking will be like, since there's it is public money or public good, then they should go to the farthest side, the ones that quote unquote are not attractive to private sector, and leave private sector to have these sites that have really developed and they have, as Mark said, PUEs or productive use of energies, and the demand is high, and that probably, because of how it is structured, even if it's cost reflective, the cost comes a little bit lower. Something else that we think could also assist is monitoring and evaluation. We have seen that monitoring and evaluation is really entrenched in the grid-connected projects. But when it comes to the off-grid projects, we haven't seen that kind of effort, in our view, with, for example, with the regulator, and probably it's because of how these sites are structured and where they are. But if we could probably be innovative and have digital monitoring and evaluation for these sites, so that at least we can also cushion the end users or the customers of electricity, so that we can know that they are receiving reliable electricity, which is also available close to 24/7. So these are some of our thoughts, or my thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks. I like that last point about M&E. I had seen a couple of from the regulator. I don't know if they're still here. Maybe they'll have an opportunity to comment on monitoring the sector and collecting data that becomes very useful in monitoring the availability and quality of electricity out there. Maxwell, very quickly, what are you greening the mini grids that you have, and at what point do you stop extending the grid and start using mini grids?
Thanks, James, and also very, very wonderful discussions filtering through. Let me just have my video on. Thanks. I just want to remark. I had Mrefu saying that, of course, there's been significant change in terms of access, and one of the panelists had already addressed this. Of course, the silver bullet, in my view, has been the REREC, really, without, of course, belaboring it. The footprint in terms of, I'm certain most of the people sitting in this meeting have interfaced or interacted with REREC in one way or the other. And that work has been massive in just trying to scale up access to power. Now, in the off-grid areas, the strategy has been to try and establish mini-grids. And these mini-grids are, of course, after resource assessment and other feasibility studies for these mini-grids. And the question usually is, of course, in the end, is what is the cost? First, of course, there are technical aspects about extending the grid. The grid cannot just be extended ad infinitum. There are quality aspects and issues that have to be taken into account. And REREC particularly previously was doing these extensions at low voltage, medium voltage and low voltage. So there was only so far that you could go with those, extending those lines before you start running into problems of extremely low voltages at the receiving end. So those were the technical considerations. And of course, then there are also questions regarding cost. If you were to extend the grid to Balesa, where we have one of our mini grids, somewhere close to North Horr, really, or if you were to extend this to Ambalo, within 60 kilometers to the border with Ethiopia, the kind of money at that time you needed to put through, first of course, you had to do the transmission infrastructure coming from Isiolo all the way to Ethiopia. And then together that transmission infrastructure, you of course, with all the attendant costs in terms of the human element. And then you would have to do a lot of other works around substations and all this put down together to go and supply a small town like Ambalo with about 200 households. I think any keen and any person who's keen on shillings and cents would not deem us a going concern if we did that. So both the financial and the technical inform these particular decisions to engage in mini grids. So when it becomes technically infeasible to extend the grid, or when the costs far outweigh the benefits, and for us, we have a very liberal way of looking at benefits. It is not just the financial question; it is the economic, and this takes into account the general well-being of an area and the livelihoods, of course, that is underpinned by Vision 2030. So this is what REREC does to try and set up these mini grids in various areas. We have, as I indicated, to date, we have done 26 of these mini grids. Kenya Power, we're in partnership with Kenya Power that does the O&M for these mini grids. And once we have established them, that is a current policy regime that we are working under. We intend to have discussions around that in the coming days. And we, of course, also partner with other people to set this up. And of course, the data, as someone indicated, is a bit sketchy. But when you aggregate, I of course have some data right here on my desk on the impact of this, but of course a more extensive study would be more beneficial. GIZ has done this in our partnership with them in Talek. In Talek, of course, they were very kind enough to engage us in that, and also even in the other mini grids. And there's been appreciable change in this. Wakaba, if you just allow me, let me make a small pitch for...
Very quickly. I still have two panelists and Q&A to go.
Okay, a very small one on the question of when we spoke about the grid, because this is something we take very seriously in Garissa. There are two issues. There is, of course, there are system challenges or system flexibility issues, which may not canvass fully. But then there are questions that can turn around the people who produce, people who generate this VRE, particularly resource forecasting of production, energy generation is a very important area. And I see that this is one of the areas for us in Garissa. We want to think more broadly on developing in-house tools and strategies to do more forecasts, and not just forecasts that are also emboldened by advancements in artificial intelligence and neural networks. This is something we want to bring on board as part of our work in promoting renewables and uptake. That not only are we in the space, we also want to be a bit in control to use the data that we have to advise not just policy but other players within the sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I allowed you an extra minute because I know REREC does not receive all the publicity that Kenya Power and Kenyan does. So always an opportunity
Thank you very much
for you to make a pitch. Kajuju, if you don't mind answering this question, how small are the systems that you can finance? How small can Ofgen go?
Well, for Ofgen, we're doing plants of 300 kilowatts and above. So we are currently not playing in the retail or the light industry space. But that said, I think Mark put it very well in terms of calling it middle class. You want to put that slightly larger sized solution in your rural homes and in your small businesses and all these things. And it's an issue of us as an industry now demystifying the usual sources of capital for these households, which is our commercial banks, our SACCOs, microfinances, these kinds of places. Because if I can be able to get a small loan to buy a generator, I should be able to get a small loan to install some solar in my home or in my small industry. I think it's a shift that is happening, but it's moving very, very slowly. It's moving in an extremely slow pace, and a lot more needs to be done to be able to sensitize the capital providers in this space to support households to get the solutions in place. Will banks and microfinances and SACCOs want to take on that risk? They'll currently classify the risk as being extremely high, and I think that's where the state comes into play, the public sector comes into play in terms of providing subsidies then and concessional funding into these banks and microfinances and SACCOs to encourage the uptake of these solutions by households. So I think it's to maybe bring on board more players. They may not be engineers, but they can be invited into associations such as this one, so that they start to feel as part of the solution, part of the industry and part of the movement, and then it can slowly pick up. They can pick up the funding for households a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's a very good point about, AEPEA, for instance. What are we doing as AEPEA to fill this middle gap there, the middle class gap that MCOPA is not filling and that the utilities are not filling? If we team up with people who are good in finance, then we can reduce the risk and be able to approach the microfinance and the banks to finance this middle class installation. So thank you very much. May I ask Maxwell to please answer the questions by Francis Makwaba on chat as we finalize, as we go to Ayub. A very simple question, Ayub. One of the reasons why people are not able to afford these solar systems at home is because they are inefficient. So you end up designing a system that requires a big solar supply. So how can people do how can energy efficiency help to increase access so that people can afford smaller systems that still serve their needs?
Thanks a lot, James. That's a very good question. And I would want to mention that there's one thing I remember that Kenya Power used to do at some point. They distributed energy efficient energy savers. They used to be called energy savers, which at some point did not continue being energy savers anymore when LEDs came. But what can the consumer do to increase energy efficiency? That's also not a very easy question. But I would say that the government also plays a big role in energy efficiency. Not just the consumer. I know Nixon Bukasti is here, and one such thing that was very good initiative by the government through AEPEA was energy audits. And this is something that was uptaken very well in 2012, 2013, all through to 2015. But I remember one day visiting a government office to ask if they're interested in doing energy efficiency for the entire building. I don't want to mention the building, but it is largely occupied by the government. And I can almost bet here that I don't think that building to date has been audited. And not just that, many government offices have not been audited. Government is also an energy consumer. I still come back to the question of policy. We have policies that are very good, and we are very good at making policies as a country. But the person who uptakes them very, very well and most effectively is the private sector. The government is not highly interested in the same policies they make. And that is sad. Energy audit is a good thing. We have seen the impacts of energy audit since the energy management regulations of 2012. Now they're getting revised. We've seen very nice and impactful reasons for the energy audit. Those people who appreciate the need for energy audit, especially in the private sector, are doing that and increasing the energy efficiency. And by doing that, many of them actually maximizing their profits. Forget about energy, profits are maximized by businesses. But it has come to a point whereby energy efficiency audit is only done by someone who appreciates the need for energy efficiency. Many years ago, around 2012 to 2015, they were being done for compliance. Someone does not want to be slapped with non-compliance penalty. But those ones who are doing it today are appreciating the need for energy efficiency. So I think policies are also good. I'm still looking forward to a time when Kenya Power, I don't know that they're represented here, but I do still look forward to a time when they will take LEDs and give the small consumers like they did with the 18 to 22 watt bulbs. That will be very, very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're making a very strong pitch for energy efficiency. I'm sure that for energy audits, I'm sure that's music to the ears of many of the attendees today. The question is, if energy efficiency pays for itself, then why do you need subsidies? Why do you need somebody else to finance it? And I think that has been the question that we've been asking ourselves for the last 20 years. Why can't it be done commercially? Thank you very much. I'm afraid I've eaten all the time for questions. I apologize for that. There were some questions on the chat, and we can endeavor to answer them from Security to everyone. This is a chance for us to market ourselves. Those who are in the business of design for solar, you can get in touch with Security. One way to improve efficiency, I guess Amani is trying to answer that question. And if there are other questions, you can still send them on the chat. I'm sure we will find ways of having those questions answered. We can also continue raising technical, constructive questions of the nature that we're seeing in this webinar on the forums that AEPEA provides, like the WhatsApp chat and other such forums. So I would like to thank everyone. I think this was extremely well participated, and I truly appreciate 42 people have remained on the webinar from the beginning to the end. That's a very good number. So very much appreciated. I'll hand it back to Hannes, and hopefully we will have some follow-up seminars in the weeks to come. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a nice weekend.
Thank you very much, James, for taking us through this discussion. Like James has said, I think this was a very, very fact topic. We've had quite some insights from the panelists. I wish we had a little bit more time for more engagements, but as he has said, we are going to have many more such webinars to continue the discussion. But beyond the webinars, like is mentioned, we have the forums provided for by the association, the WhatsApp group, we have a Facebook page, and we can be able to continue to engage on those. However, for the specific questions that have been taken, I know we have the contacts of each and every one of you. So we'll endeavor to put the questions to the panelists, and we can be able to give you back the answers to those questions, those that have been asked, or if you still feel you can be able to post your question or send the question to the AEPEA email, and we can continue the discussion. And I don't want to really go back into the discussions that have been made, but one of the interesting things that was mentioned towards the start and has been mentioned towards the end is the issue of policy, and has been mentioned by most of the panelists. Mark talked about, and he said there's need for policy intelligence from government. Ayub has also posted and said government in putting up policies at times which they are not following. But my take on policy, having been in and around government for some time, policy is not and never for government. Policy is normally done and driven by industry. Government and institutions like AEPEA are custodians or agents that are put in place to be able to midwife and guide and help you achieve the policies that you would like to have. So that challenge comes back to us all as professionals to be able to know and understand that. Because many times we get opportunities when the government agencies that are placed to drive these policy formulations come to us, and at times we seem disinterested, or at times we allow it to go to social media and be discussed by people who actually don't know how power is sold to Kenya Power, and imagine that KenGen can sell power to an IPP for an IPP to sell that power to Kenya Power. I don't know how they will manage that, because the meter is at the meter selling that power is at the power plant. So I don't know if they expect, people anticipate that this power is actually sold in trucks, that you can be able to smuggle it around. So, but if we allow some of these discussions, the same thing happened to the solar PV regulations last year, and it will happen to other regulations. If as professionals, we are not ready to engage and be able to push and have these policy discussions made, then they are going to be taken over by people who don't understand, and we may end up with things that don't work. And so having said that, it is important that we support these policies. It's important that we support these regulations. And at times, as we come up with this, also just a comment on the regulations and policy matters, the solar PV regulations, besides all the other drivers, have been responsible for the uptake and the confidence that people have had in solar PV. The energy management regulations are also responsible for that. So when we get an institution like AEPEA trying to re-engage us so that we can make it better, let's look at it from that perspective and understand that it's the things that we professionally argue and put across that will actually make it into the policy, rather than some of the things that we say on the side. So having said that, I think if we want to continue to engage with this, we can be able to have a discussion that can go on and on and on for several months. And so we'll be able to continue that in another forum. As I've said, we'll continue that on the other platforms that we have. But mine is to thank each and every one of you for making time to join, to thank our moderator for having facilitated the forum to go as smoothly as it has been, to thank each and every one of the speakers who will continue engaging on this topic. And even if need be, if we need to make a communication or a publication that can be shared across the sector, we can be able to arrange and do that so that we keep this conversation and keep guiding what happens in this sector. So with those few remarks, and on behalf of the president of the association, Professor Israel da Silva, I'd like to thank you all and declare our webinar closed. The times for the curfew have been shortened. It is 8 from 8 in Nairobi and the adjacent counties, which have been passed as having high levels of COVID. So for those of us in the offices, we can be able to pack and be home safe in good time. Thank you and bye everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.